Okay, first step is to remove the lid, make sure your hands are dry, it's not slippery, and find a good place to sit it where it won't get broken, because these things are basically glass. I'm going to sit it on an old towel over here in the corner. So that's the first step. So one of the first things you want to do when you take the lid off is to note where your water line is, and you'll note that there's some writing back here and it says there's a water line. You probably can't read it, but shows the water line. This one's about right. You want to make sure that the water is not too high on this tube right here. If it's too high, it'll run over the tube. You'll hear dripping sounds. You'll waste a lot of water. So you want the water to be at least like a centimeter or so below the top of that tube. And again, not too high, not too low. You can mark it with a pencil so that you can remember where it is later on, and we'll cover what to do about that in a minute. The next thing to do is turn off the water. Makes life a lot easier, a lot cleaner, a lot less messy. This one just has a simple 90-degree off valve. A lot of them have a turn valve. Just turn until it's off. Oh, and before I go on, I should tell you that the water in here is perfectly clean. I mean, yes, it's collected sediment. This is the stuff that's in your drinking water. It's collected it over the last, in this case, 25 years. But the water in here is clean. It's not unsanitary anyway. Another common problem is the flush arm here is oftentimes misadjusted. A lot of times just this nut is loose, and you can position the arm correctly and tighten the nut. This little piece of plastic that's green on this toilet keeps the arm from just falling into the tank. If there's a little stop on there, if that little stop is broken, the arm will just fall into the tank. It'll get in the way of things. It'll keep the flapper valve, that black thing down inside there, from closing. I'll show you that. So that black thing down there, inside there, everything's black, right? That flapper valve down there that I'm moving on the end of the chain, that, if things get in the way of that, if the chain gets underneath it, your tank will run and run and run and run and run, and the water will never shut off. So, yeah, the first thing to do is make sure that your arm is okay, and it's adjusted properly. Notice that the chain is a little bit loose. It's not terribly tight, but just, a couple more little notches, it would be tight. You don't want it tight. You want it just a little bit loose. So when you pull up, before it hits the lid, and you can look right along here, before it hits the lid, you want to make sure it's flushing. And it should be like right about in that position. It won't come all the way open with the lid on, but it'll come pretty close. Okay, and that'll allow for it to operate properly. It'll allow for it to flush properly. A very common thing if your toilet is not flushing completely is this tube right here will be out of position or missing. There should always be a tube down in here, and a lot of times people put it over the side because they think it saves water. What this tube is doing is it's filling the trap down there at the bottom in your toilet. It's filling that thing down in there. And if there's not enough water down there, it won't siphon properly. It won't flush the toilet properly. So this tube should be in place. A lot of times they just rot off, and you have to look underneath here and find there's like a little nipple sticking out, and you have to get a new piece of tubing if it's missing. Put it on here, make sure it stays down there. In fact, this one, the reason I was messing with this toilet today is because this had popped off of here. If your water level is not high enough, there won't be enough water when you flush to sweep everything away out of the toilet. So you need to adjust your water level up, and how you do that is with this type of valve. What you do is you have two adjustments. You have the coarse adjustment here and the fine adjustment here. The coarse adjustment moves the ball like in big, like 2 centimeters at a time, or way too much. Typically all you need to do is adjust this little valve over here, or adjust this little screw over here, and it pokes directly on top of the valve. You can see that white thing. And on this one, if you back the screw out a little bit, the water level goes up a little bit. So that's what you need to do. You need to get about the water level that the toilet recommends. Now, one of the problems that toilets have, especially if you have a cheap valve, is this ball is trying to float up and it's trying to push this thing over backwards. You can see it'll move pretty easily. Especially on cheap toilets, the plastic will deform over time. So what I do is I get a shaving cream can that fits in here kind of tightly. This is the lid off of a shaving cream can. And I wedge it in there. You can trim it as necessary and it will keep this thing upright so that the water level won't keep changing. The next thing, if you're having toilet problems, especially if it's like the dripping sound and the toilet keeps refilling or whatever, you hear that drip, drip, drip all the time, it's usually the flapper valve. Flapper valve is this thing on the end of the chain. They're not very expensive, but I would buy a good one. In fact, I would stick with the original manufacturer if you can. There's nothing to it. It's just a cone-shaped piece of rubber, like that. It's got some ears on it. These holes go over some protrusions down there at the bottom. I don't know if you can see it right. Get my finger out of the way. Yeah, there's one on this side. There's one over on that side. Not easy to see because they're black. But they just slip on these, and that's it. So what you want to check is you want to check to make sure that this is smooth. If it looks even a little bit rough, it's worn out. It's gone. So it should have a nice smooth appearance, and when you rub it, you should not get a lot of black stuff off on your finger. If you get a lot of like really nasty looking black stuff, it's not minerals and it's not going to be algae, it's rubber decaying, and that's, even though it looks like there's not very much gone, it'll cause serious dripping. So just go buy a new one. Again, they're not that expensive. Stick with a good brand. Also, while you're at it, you might want to check the seat down there. You see that round hole down here. Check that to make sure there's no nicks, scratches, breaks in it. If your tank level is set too high, you can see the water is just trying to run down that tube. I mean, it's just aching to jump into that tube and just flow away. And what will happen is, you'll hear this constant dripping as it does it. Like that, you can see it starting to run in there. It'll just never quit filling the tank. So when the tank level is too high, you have to adjust it. Again, the same as when the tank level is too low, but the opposite. You can use your coarse adjustment or your fine adjustment. On this toilet, you run the screw down and it shuts off sooner. In other words, the fill level will be lower. If you're getting a mysterious leak, you see this brown thing right at the end of my finger? There's another one over there. These are actually bolts. That's what holds the tank on. That's what holds the tank against the rest of the toilet. You can see here, there's a seam, and those two parts are held together by those bolts. And down underneath here, get way down here, way on the floor, you'll see the bottom of that bolt. And those things are holding the tank in place. Those hold the tank down here against the bottom part of the toilet. And if you're getting a mysterious leak and you can't figure out where it's coming from, a lot of times it's that bolt. Now the bad news is these things can be real terrible to take off when they get corroded and whatever. So yeah, they're not fun, and you want to be careful you don't crack stuff while you're trying to get it off of there. But in any event, if you're getting a mysterious leak, that's where it can be. Now, what those bolts look like when they're not in position, they come in plastic like this. This would be inside the tank, and then this would be on the bottom down here, then that would be on the bottom. Obviously this is an old one, that's a nylon one. Here's an old one that came out of a tank just recently. There's a rubber washer, and a metal washer, and then the nut and lock washers at the bottom. Here's a brand new one. Here's what it looks like when it's brand new. So yeah, it just goes into the toilet. The rubber washer part goes into the toilet. The rest of it goes on the bottom of the toilet and holds the two together. Again, do not go crazy tightening these down. You will crack your toilet. So I just use my fingers. They don't need to be that tight. Okay, what else about these? You can replace them one at a time. That helps, so you don't have to rip the whole tank off the back. You just take one out at a time, replace it, put the other one back on. When you take it out, the water will run out, so make sure your tank is drained. Another common problem is this is why I started working on this toilet today, was the seat gets loose and wiggles. And this one, this is an American Standard, and on this one all you do is there's some screws back here and you tighten it down. I don't know if you can see that, get my hand out of the way. Tighten it down, and under here there's nothing to do. It's just this rubber thing that expands and fills up the hole in the ceramic and makes it tighter. So that's all there is to this one. Just tighten that screw until it's tight. You don't want to go too nuts on this, because if the rubber's worn out or whatever, you over tighten it, you can crack this porcelain. Again, this porcelain is just glass, so don't want to go nuts on it. A lot of them down here will have a nut, like a plastic nut or even a brass nut underneath here. I don't recommend using tools on it except to loosen it. When you go to tighten it, it should tighten with your fingers, and if you go nuts on it with a pair of pliers, you will crack the toilet and you will regret that. So if it needs tightening, tighten it with your fingers as much as you can. Use a dry rag, that'll help, but you know, stay away from like getting a wrench on there and really cranking on it. Okay, so this one, all I have to do is tighten it down, make that rubber tube in there expand, and pretty much it. It will cause the seat to get tighter. This one's pretty loose. Okay, and when I'm done, snap these things closed, and I'm back to normal. One last thing, if when you sit down on the toilet, if you put your back against it, if it really bangs against the wall, one trick is to get a sponge and force it down there between the wall and the tank, because if this tank hits that ceramic wall hard enough, you can break it, chip it, whatever. Okay, so that's about it for toilet tank tune-up. Hope you found this useful.